My son thought I was a senile old man being scammed out of our $2 million family home, but he didn't realize I was the one setting the trap. When the house went up in flames, the secret I'd been hiding for years finally turned his world to ash. The smell of old cedar and floor wax had defined my life for 42 years. It was the scent of my children's childhoods, of my late wife Martha's favorite candles, and of the quiet, dusty afternoons of my retirement. The house at 1422 Oakcrest Drive wasn't just a structure of brick and mortar. It was a museum of a life well lived. Every scratch on the mahogany dining table told a story. The time David tried to carve his initials when he was 7, the wine stain from our 20th anniversary, the indentations from decades of homework and holiday dinners. But as I stood in the center of the living room, watching the late afternoon sun filter through the stained glass transom, I knew those stories were no longer tied to these walls. I had signed the papers 3 days ago. The sold sign was already being hammered into the soft spring earth of the front lawn. I heard the roar of an engine before I saw the car. It was David's silver Audi, the one he bought to celebrate his promotion to senior VP, screeching into the driveway with a desperation that vibrated through the floorboards. I took a slow breath, bracing myself. I had known this moment was coming, but no amount of mental preparation makes it easier to face your only son when he thinks you've just betrayed the family legacy. The front door didn't just open. It slammed against the hallway wall with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. David didn't even take off his shoes. He marched into the living room, his face a frantic shade of crimson, a crumpled printout from a real estate website clutched in his trembling hand. "Tell me it's a mistake," he barked, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Tell me the neighbors are playing a sick joke, or that the website was hacked. Tell me you didn't just sell the house, Dad." I didn't move from my spot by the window. I kept my hands folded behind my back, trying to project a calmness I didn't entirely feel. "It's not a mistake, David. The house is sold. The closing is in 30 days. For a moment, he just stared at me, his mouth hanging open as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Then the explosion came. "Are you out of your mind? This is our home. This is where Mom lived. You told me this house would stay in the family. You said it was my inheritance. You sold it without even calling me, without asking if I wanted to buy it. I have the money, Dad. I could have kept it." "It wasn't about the money, David," I said softly. "Then what was it about?" he shouted, stepping closer, his expensive suit jacket flapping as he gestured wildly at the room. "Is it a woman? Have you been scammed? Did some friend convince you to liquidate everything so you can go live on a beach? You're 68 years old. You don't just dump 40 years of history for a quick buck, unless there's something seriously wrong with your head." I watched him, my heart aching. He looked so much like Martha when he was angry, the same furrow in his brow, the same way he leaned forward on the balls of his feet. But where Martha's fire was always directed at injustice, David's fire was currently fueled by a sense of loss he couldn't quantify. He saw the house as a trophy, a symbol of his status and his roots. He didn't see it for what it had become to me, a hollow shell filled with ghosts that were starting to feel more like shadows than memories. "I'm moving into the apartment on 5th Street, I told him, referring to a modest one-bedroom I'd rented near the downtown district. "It's closer to the library, and I don't need 4 bedrooms and a half-acre of lawn to maintain anymore." David laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "The apartment on 5th? That's a dump, Dad. It's a shoebox. Why would you trade this estate, for a rental? Where is the money going?" The market value on this place is nearly $2 million. You don't just move into a one-bedroom apartment unless you've lost everything. Did you gamble it away? Is that it? Are you in debt? I don't have a penny of debt, David, and I haven't lost a thing. Then show me the bank statement, he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low hiss. If you didn't lose it and you aren't being scammed, then where is the $2 million? Because if you're throwing away my future and the home I grew up in just to sit on a pile of cash in a cheap apartment, I need to know why. I'm your son. I have a right to know what's happening to the family assets. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the greed buried under the nostalgia, the way he calculated the loss of his inheritance more than the loss of the home itself. He didn't know about the spreadsheets I'd been keeping for 3 years. He didn't know about the secret meetings in the back of the community center, or the countless hours I'd spent scouting locations in the city's poorest wards. He didn't know about the Martha Graham Foundation for Urban Renewal, a project I had poured every spare cent of my pension into, and which now required a massive infusion of capital to survive its first year. I had decided long ago that I wouldn't tell him until it was finished. I wanted the work to speak for itself. I wanted him to see the result, not the sacrifice. But looking at his face now, twisted with a sense of entitlement, I realized the silence was only making the wound deeper. "David, please," I said, reaching out a hand, but he recoiled as if I were a stranger. "Don't, David, please me," he snapped. "I'm calling a lawyer. I'm going to contest the sale. I'll claim you weren't of sound mind. You can't just destroy everything we built because you're having some late-life crisis." He turned to storm out, but he stopped at the foyer table. His eyes fell on a thick, unmarked manila envelope I had left there, intended for my lawyer. Before I could move, David snatched it up. "What's this?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. "More secrets?" "David, put that down. That's private." He didn't listen. He ripped the seal open, his fingers fumbling with the paper. He pulled out a stack of architectural blueprints and a series of legal contracts. His eyes scanned the first page, his brow knitting together in confusion. "The East Side Community Hub," he muttered, reading the header. "Recipient of grant fund, $1.8 million?" He looked up at me, the anger replaced by a chilling, sharp suspicion. "Dad, who is Project Phoenix, and why is your signature at the bottom of a deed for a condemned warehouse in the slums?" Just then the doorbell rang. It wasn't the polite chime of a visitor. It was a heavy, rhythmic pounding. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I saw the silhouette of 2 men in dark suits. "Mr. Graham," a muffled voice called out from the porch. "We're from the city auditor's office. We have some questions regarding the illegal transfer of funds from the Oakcrest sale. Open up." David's face went pale as he looked from the door to the papers in his hand, then back to me. "Dad," he whispered, the rage replaced by a terrifying realization. "What the hell have you done?" The pounding on the door felt like it was echoing inside my skull. I didn't move, my eyes locked on David, who was looking at the blueprints as if they were a confession of a crime. The $2 million from the sale of the house hadn't even cleared escrow yet, not fully, but I had already moved the first installment of my life savings into the foundation's account. I had been careful, or so I thought. "Open the door, Dad," David whispered, his voice trembling. "If you don't, they'll kick it in. God, is this why you were so quiet? You're laundering money? You're involved in some kind of urban development scam?" "It's not a scam, David," I said, my voice steadier than my hands. "It's a legacy, something your mother and I talked about before she got sick, something that matters more than brick and mahogany. I walked past him, my heart hammering against my ribs, and turned the heavy brass handle. The two men on the porch weren't the typical bureaucrats I had expected. They were sharp-featured, wearing charcoal suits that cost more than my first car, and they held themselves with the cold, practiced indifference of men who were used to delivering bad news. "Arthur Graham?" the taller one asked. He didn't wait for an answer. He flashed a badge, not from the city auditor, but from a state financial crimes unit. "I'm Investigator Miller. This is my colleague, Mr. Vance. We have a court order to freeze all assets associated with the Martha Graham Foundation and any personal accounts linked to the sale of 1,422 Oak Crest Drive." David pushed past me, his face white. "Wait, I'm his son. David Graham. I'm a VP at Sterling Roth. What is this about? My father's a retired teacher. There must be a mistake. He's been confused lately. He sold the house without consulting anyone." Miller looked at David with a flicker of something like pity, then turned back to me. "Confusion doesn't explain the $3 million that moved through a shell company in Delaware last Tuesday, Mr. Graham. Nor does it explain why a nonprofit foundation with no registered board members is purchasing distressed properties in the East Side District at 3 times their assessed value." I felt the room tilt. $3 million? I only transferred the initial $800,000 from my retirement fund. The house money hasn't even— "Save it for the deposition," Vance interrupted, stepping into the foyer. He began scanning the room, his eyes landing on the manila envelope still in David's hand. "Is that the documentation for the Project Phoenix acquisition? We'll be taking that." David handed it over without a second thought. He didn't even look at me. He looked at the floor, his shoulders hunched as if he were trying to distance himself from a sinking ship. "I had nothing to do with this," he muttered to the investigators. "I just found out today. I've been trying to stop him from selling the house." "David," I said, the word coming out as a strangled plea. "I'm not laundering money. I'm trying to build a youth center. The warehouse, it's going to be a vocational school. I used the Delaware entity to keep the developers from outbidding me once they heard a foundation was interested. It's a standard tactic to keep prices down." "Standard for a real estate mogul, maybe?" Miller said, taking the envelope from David. "A bit sophisticated for a man living on a pension. Unless, of course, you aren't the one running the show. We have reason to believe the Martha Graham Foundation is being used as a front for a much larger operation, one that involves the very people you claim to be helping." "That's impossible," I snapped. "I vetted every contractor. I personally met with the community leaders." Vance pulled a single sheet of paper from the envelope David had handed him. It wasn't one of the blueprints. It was a wire transfer confirmation I hadn't seen before. He held it up so I could see the name at the bottom. "Do you know a Marcus Thorne, Mr. Graham?" The name hit me like a physical blow. Marcus Thorne was the man who had approached me 6 months ago. He was a community consultant, a man who seemed to know everyone in the East Side. He had been the one to find the warehouse. He had been the one who suggested the Delaware filing to protect the mission. He had been my primary contact for every legal hurdle we'd faced. "He's my consultant," I said, my voice failing. "He's also the lead person of interest in a multi-state racketeering investigation," Miller said. "And according to this transfer, he just moved $2.4 million out of your foundation's account and into an offshore holding in the Cayman Islands, an account that, according to the digital footprint, was accessed from a computer inside this very house." David's head snapped up. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a new kind of horror. Not the horror of a lost inheritance, but the horror of realization. "Dad," David whispered, "the password to your home office. You never changed it after Mom died, did you?" "No," I said, my mind racing. "Why would I?" David looked at the investigators, then back at me. "I was here last weekend, Dad, while you were at the grocery store. I used your computer to check some work emails because my laptop died. I saw a notification pop up. It was an encrypted chat window. I thought it was just spam, so I closed it. But it was already logged in. Someone had remote access to your entire system." Investigator Miller stepped closer, his presence suddenly much more menacing. "Mr. Graham, we're going to need you to come with us, and we're going to need to take every electronic device in this house." "Wait," I said, a cold sweat breaking out across my neck. "If Marcus Thorne stole the money, then I'm the victim. I'm the one who's been robbed." "That's one way to look at it," Miller said. "The other way is that you're the perfect fall guy, a grieving widower with a clean record, selling his only asset to fund a charity that just happens to be a funnel for organized crime. It looks like a very deliberate, very well-planned exit strategy." "I didn't do this," I shouted, the desperation finally breaking through my facade. "The house is gone. My wife's memory is in that foundation. I wouldn't tarnish it." "The house isn't just gone, mister. Graham," Vance said, looking out the window at the sold sign. "The buyers? The ones who offered you that over-market price in cash? We just got word from the records office. The holding company that bought this house is a subsidiary of the same firm Marcus Thorne uses to wash his consulting fees." I felt the world go dark at the edges. They hadn't just stolen the money. They had stolen the house itself. They had played me from both sides, using my own desire to do good as the bait. I had handed them the keys to my life and thanked them for the privilege. David took a step toward me, but his face wasn't filled with sympathy. It was filled with a cold, hard resolve. "I told you, Dad. I told you this was a mistake. You were so obsessed with your secret venture that you didn't see what was happening right under your nose." He turned to the investigators. "I have records of every time I've visited this house in the last month. I have my own logs. I'll cooperate fully. I want it on the record that I cautioned him against these financial moves." "David?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're turning on me." "I'm protecting myself, Dad. I have a career. I have a life. I'm not going down for whatever mess you've let these people drag you into." As Miller reached for his handcuffs, my cell phone buzzed in my pocket. I instinctively reached for it, and for a second, the investigators let me. It was a text message from an unknown number. "The warehouse is burning, Arthur. I hope you kept the insurance papers in a safe place. You're going to need the payout to post bail." I looked up at the window, and in the far distance, past the trees of the neighborhood I had called home for 40 years, a thick black column of smoke began to rise into the clear blue sky. The sight of the smoke curling into the sky felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. That warehouse wasn't just a building. It was the culmination of every hope I had left. It was supposed to be a vocational center for kids who had been discarded by the system, a place where they could learn a trade and find a path out of the cycle of poverty that had claimed too many lives in the East Side. Now it was a funeral pyre for my wife's memory and my own integrity. "The warehouse," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the ringing in my ears. "It's on fire." Investigator Miller didn't look toward the horizon. He kept his eyes fixed on me, his expression hardening. How convenient. A massive financial discrepancy and a sudden, catastrophic fire at the primary asset of your foundation. You're not just looking at wire fraud now, Mr. Graham. Arson for insurance purposes is a much heavier charge. I didn't do this, I shouted, the panic finally boiling over. I just got a text. Someone sent me a message saying it was burning. Vance stepped forward and snatched the phone from my hand. I didn't resist. I couldn't. My legs felt like they were made of water. I sank into the velvet armchair, the one Martha had picked out for our 25th anniversary, and buried my face in my hands. The message came from an encrypted burner, Vance said, reading the screen. The warehouse is burning. Post bail. It looks like a warning from an accomplice, Arthur, or a taunt from a partner you're trying to screw over. David stood by the fireplace, his face a mask of cold fury. He wasn't looking at me with concern anymore. He was looking at me like I was a parasite that had attached itself to his carefully curated life. This is what you sold the house for? To play games with criminals? To set fire to a neighborhood for an insurance check? Do you have any idea what this does to me? My firm is about to go through a merger. If my father is indicted for arson and money laundering, my career is over. David, please, I begged, looking up. You know me. I'm a teacher. I've never even had a speeding ticket. Why would I do this? Because you were lonely, David snapped, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Because Mom died, and you needed to feel important again. You wanted to be a hero, but you were too arrogant to ask for help. You thought you could navigate a world you don't understand, and you got played. Or worse, you liked the thrill of it. Handcuff him, Miller ordered. The cold steel of the cuffs snapping around my wrists felt like the finality of a grave. They led me out of my home, past the sold sign that now looked like a tombstone. As they pushed me into the back of the black sedan, I saw the neighbors peering through their curtains, people I'd known for decades, people I'd shared lawnmowers and holiday cards with, watching as the crazy old man was hauled away in the back of a police car. The drive to the precinct was a blur of rain and neon lights. The smoke from the east side hung over the city like a shroud. Inside the interrogation room, the air was stale and smelled of burnt coffee and desperation. Miller and Vance sat across from me, a thick file spread out between us. Let's talk about Marcus Thorne, Miller said, sliding a photo across the table. It was a grainy shot of Thorne leaving a high-end restaurant with a woman whose face was blurred. He's been under surveillance for 18 months. He specializes in philanthropic consulting for high-net-worth individuals looking to hide assets. You were a bit of a departure for him, Arthur. You aren't high net worth. You're just a man with a house in a gentrifying neighborhood. He told me he cared about the East Side, I said, my voice cracking. He had plans, detailed plans. He knew the zoning laws, the grant structures. He knew how to use your name to bypass the city's vetting process, Vance countered, because you were Arthur Graham, the beloved local teacher. The city council fast-tracked the permits. They didn't look at the contractors Thorne brought in. They didn't check the insurance riders, but we did. He flipped a page in the file. The warehouse was insured for $6 million. The policy was updated 3 weeks ago to include a total loss clause that pays out directly to a private account in the Caymans, the same account Thorne just moved your money into. And the beneficiary isn't the Martha Graham Foundation. It's a person named A. Graham. That's me, I said, but I never signed that. I signed for the foundation. The signature on the rider is a perfect match for your driver's license, Miller said. And here's the kicker, Arthur. We found the accelerant trail. The fire didn't start by accident. It was professionally set. And the security cameras from the building across the street caught a figure entering the warehouse an hour before the first alarm. A man of your height, your build. wearing a jacket exactly like the one we found in your hallway. I felt the walls closing in. This wasn't just a theft, it was a total frame job. They had everything: the money trail, the signature, the visual evidence. I was at home, I whispered. I was waiting for David. David says he arrived at 5:30, Vance noted. The fire started at 4:15. You have an hour and 15 minutes unaccounted for. I was napping. I was in the house. Can anyone prove that? I went silent. I was a man living alone in a house filled with memories. The only witness to my presence was a ghost. The door to the interrogation room opened, and a man in a sharp blue suit walked in. It wasn't my lawyer. It was David's personal attorney, a man named Henderson who I'd met exactly once at a Christmas party. My client has authorized me to offer a statement, Henderson said, ignoring me and looking straight at the investigators. David Graham is prepared to testify that his father has been showing signs of early-onset dementia. He has documented instances of confusion, memory loss, and erratic financial behavior. He's willing to provide a medical history that suggests Arthur was not competent when he signed these documents. I stared at the back of Henderson's head. David said that? He's telling you I'm senile. It's the only way to keep you out of a state penitentiary, Arthur, Henderson said, turning to me with a look of practiced sympathy. If you're incompetent, the contracts are void. The money can be frozen and potentially recovered. You'll go to a supervised care facility instead of a cell. I am not demented, I roared, slamming my cuffed hands onto the table. He's lying to save his own skin. He wants the house money back, and he's willing to lobotomize me legally to get it. Calm down, Mr. Graham, Miller said, though he looked intrigued by the internal family war. I want to see the footage, I said, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The footage from across the street. If that man is me, then I'm a ghost. Show me. Vance hesitated, then looked at Miller. Miller nodded. Vance opened a laptop and turned it toward me. It was a grainy black and white feed. A figure in a dark windbreaker and a baseball cap moved toward the side door of the warehouse. The gait was familiar, the slight limp in the right leg from my old hiking injury. It looked exactly like me. But then, the figure stopped at the door. He turned his head for a fraction of a second to check the street. The cap shadowed his face, but as he reached for the door handle, he adjusted his glove. My heart stopped. On the pinky finger of the man's left hand there was a flash of light, a reflection of a street lamp. It was a ring. A very specific ring. A gold signet ring with a crest I had seen every day for the last 10 years. It was the ring I had given David when he graduated from business school. I looked at the screen, then at Henderson, then at the two investigators. The betrayal I had felt minutes ago was nothing compared to the ice that now flooded my veins. David wasn't trying to save me from a crime I didn't commit. He was the one who had committed it. I need to speak to my son, I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from miles away. He's left the building, Arthur, Henderson said. He's at the house, packing up the rest of your things. He said it was too painful to see you like this. I looked at the investigator. He's not packing my things. He's looking for the ledger. What ledger? Miller asked. The one Martha kept, I said, the realization finally snapping into place. She didn't just leave me the house. She left me the records of the family business before she retired. She was an auditor, Miller. She kept everything. And she always said, if you want to find the devil, don't look in the fire. Look in the books. Suddenly, the fire alarm in the police precinct began to scream. High-pitched, deafening, and relentless. Red lights began to strobe in the hallway. "What's going on?" Vance shouted over the noise. A frantic officer burst into the room. "We've got a gas leak in the basement. The whole block is being evacuated. Move the prisoners to the transport van, now!" In the chaos, Henderson grabbed my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong, painful even. He leaned into my ear, his voice barely a whisper beneath the roar of the alarm. "David didn't send me here to help you, Arthur. He sent me to make sure you signed the incompetency papers. You were supposed to be the quiet victim, but you just had to look at the ring, didn't you?" He shoved a pen into my cuffed hand and pressed a single sheet of paper onto the table. Not a medical release, but a transfer of power of attorney. "Sign it," Henderson hissed, "or you won't make it to the transport van. Accidents happen in evacuations, Arthur, especially for confused old men." The fluorescent lights of the interrogation room flickered, dying out for a heartbeat before the emergency red strobes took over. The scream of the fire alarm was a physical assault, a jagged, rhythmic pulsing that made it impossible to think. Henderson's grip on my arm was like an iron vice, his eyes wide and wild in the crimson light. "Sign it, Arthur," he hissed, his face inches from mine. "Sign it and this all goes away. You'll be tucked into a nice quiet room with a garden view. No trials, no prison, no shame. David will handle everything." I looked down at the paper. Power of attorney. It wasn't just about the house or the foundation. If I signed this, I was giving David the right to decide my medical care, my living situation, and most importantly, my silence. I was giving him the legal authority to bury me alive. He was always impatient, I said, my voice surprisingly calm amidst the roar of the alarm. Even as a boy, he never wanted to wait for the harvest. He wanted to pick the fruit while it was still green. "Last chance," Henderson growled. He tried to force the pen into my cramped, cuffed fingers. I didn't sign. I twisted my wrist, ignoring the bite of the metal, and drove the pen into the center of the legal document, tearing a jagged hole through the signature line and into the wood of the table beneath. Henderson snarled, raising a hand to strike me, but the door burst open. It wasn't the investigators. It was two men in firefighter turnout gear, their faces obscured by masks and soot-streaked visors. "Evacuate!" one of them barked, his voice muffled. "Gas levels are critical! Out now!" In the confusion, Henderson was shoved aside. One of the firefighters grabbed the chain between my handcuffs and yanked me toward the door. I expected to see Miller or Vance in the hallway, but the corridor was a nightmare of yellow smoke and shouting people. The air didn't smell like gas. It smelled like sulfur and something chemically sweet. A smoke bomb. "Where are we going?" I coughed, my eyes stinging. "Where are the investigators?" The man didn't answer. He dragged me past the stairs toward the service elevator at the back of the building. We weren't going to the main exit. We were going down. The elevator door slid shut, cutting off the worst of the noise. The man reached up and pulled off his mask. It wasn't a firefighter. It was a man I recognized from the Project Phoenix meetings, one of the contractors Marcus Thorne had introduced as a specialist. "Mr. Thorne wants to have a word, Arthur," the man said, his voice cold and devoid of the friendly banter he'd used when we were discussing floor plans. "You've made things very complicated." "Where is my son?" I demanded, though a part of me already knew. "David. David's currently realizing that your secret venture involved more than just charity. He's at the house looking for your wife's ledger. He seems to think it's the only thing that can keep him out of the fire he started." The elevator hit the basement level with a jar. I was led through a damp parking garage to a waiting black SUV with tinted windows. The side door slid open, and I was shoved inside. Sitting in the back seat, looking as composed as if he were waiting for a flight in a first-class lounge, was Marcus Thorne. He was holding a tablet, watching a live feed of the East Side warehouse. On the screen, the building was a skeleton of orange and black, the roof beginning to sag into the inferno. "It's a beautiful sight, isn't it?" Thorne said, not looking up. "A clean slate. That's what urban renewal is really about, Arthur. Clearing away the rot so something profitable can grow." "You used me," I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "I used a willing participant," Thorne corrected, finally looking at me. His eyes were like chips of flint. "You wanted to be the savior of the East Side. David wanted his inheritance early to cover a $3 million misunderstanding with some very impatient creditors in the city. You both provided exactly what I needed, a respectable name and a desperate inside man." "David, he burned the warehouse?" "He had to," Thorne sighed, tapping the screen. "You were getting too close to the truth about the subcontractors. You were starting to ask about the extra materials being moved through the loading docks. David was supposed to talk you out of it, but when he realized you were actually going through with the sale of the house, he panicked. He thought you'd spend every cent before he could get his hands on it. So we offered him a deal. The insurance payout from the warehouse plus the house proceeds in exchange for setting the stage." Thorne leaned forward, his shadow looming over me in the cramped space of the car. "But David made a mistake. He didn't realize you had a backup. He didn't know about Martha's ledger. He thinks it's hidden in the house, under the floorboards in the nursery. But we've searched that house from top to bottom, Arthur. It's not there." I felt a small, cold spark of triumph. Martha had been an auditor for the city's most dangerous unions for 30 years. She knew how to hide things. She had taught me that the best place to hide a secret wasn't in a safe or under a floorboard. It was in plain sight, where no one would ever think to look because it was too mundane to notice. "You won't find it," I said. Thorne smiled, a slow, predatory expression. "I think I will. Because David is currently at the house with a gallon of gasoline and a very short fuse. He's convinced that if he can't find the ledger, he'll just burn the evidence of his own involvement along with the house. He doesn't care about the history anymore, Arthur. He just wants to survive." The SUV lurched into motion, speeding out of the garage and into the rain-slicked streets. "We're going to the house," Thorne said. "You're going to tell David exactly where that ledger is. And then you're going to sign those papers Henderson gave you. If you don't, I'm going to let David finish what he started. The police will find a tragic scene. A senile old man who returned to his sold home, trapped in a fire started by a faulty heater, and a grieving son who tried and failed to save him." "He's your partner," I whispered. "You'd let him die too?" "David is a liability," Thorne said, checking his watch. "He's emotional. He's weak. If he's caught in the accident as well, it only makes the story more believable. A double tragedy." We turned onto Oakcrest Drive. The street was quiet, the neighbors likely tucked away in their beds, unaware of the drama unfolding in the house with the sold sign. But as we pulled up to the curb, I saw the silver Audi idling in the driveway. The front door of the house was wide open. A flickering light, orange and hungry, was already visible through the living room window. Thorne's man dragged me out of the car and toward the porch. The smell of gasoline was overwhelming now, stinging my nose and throat. "David!" I screamed as we stepped into the foyer. My son was standing in the center of the room, a scorched crowbar in one hand and a lighter in the other. He looked like a specter, his eyes sunken and rimmed with red. He was staring at the wall where the portrait of Martha used to hang. "It's not here, Dad," he said, his voice a hollowed-out wreck. I checked the vents. I checked the cellar. I checked the nursery. Where did she put it? Where is the list of Thorne's companies? David, drop the lighter, I pleaded. Thorne is right outside. He's going to kill us both. David laughed, a high, wheezing sound. He can't kill me if I'm already gone. If I don't find that ledger, I'm a dead man anyway. Give it to me. Tell me where it is. He stepped toward me, the lighter flame dancing dangerously close to a trail of gasoline he'd poured across the mahogany table. But then he froze. From the shadows of the dining room, a third voice spoke, a voice that shouldn't have been there. He can't tell you, David, because he doesn't actually have it. Investigator Miller stepped into the light, his service weapon drawn and leveled at David's chest. But he wasn't looking at my son with the triumph of a cop making a bust. He looked terrified. "Arthur," Miller said, his eyes darting to the basement door behind David, "tell your son to step away from the floor joists. Right now." "Why?" David sneered, his thumb twitching on the lighter. "Because," Miller whispered, "the gas leak at the precinct wasn't a distraction. It was a test, and the sensors just went off here, too. Thorne didn't just bring you here to talk, Arthur. He rigged the neighborhood's main line." As if on cue, a low, guttural rumble began beneath our feet, a sound like a freight train screaming through the earth. The floorboards began to vibrate, and the smell of gas suddenly shifted from the surface smell of the cans David held to the thick, suffocating stench of a ruptured main. "David, run!" I yelled. But David didn't run. He looked down at the lighter in his hand, then at the trail of gasoline at his feet, and then at me. A look of absolute, soul-shattering realization crossed his face. "He didn't want the ledger," David whispered, the lighter slipping from his trembling fingers. "He wanted us all in the same place." The lighter hit the floor. The lighter hit the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the chambers of my heart. For a heartbeat, there was only the tiny, flickering flame of the Zippo against the hardwood. Then, the gasoline David had poured caught. A ribbon of blue and orange fire raced across the floor, tracing the path he'd laid out with such desperate precision. But the gasoline was just the fuse. The real threat was the low, guttural thrumming beneath our feet, the sound of the city's gas main being forced into the house's skeletal plumbing. "Out! Everyone out now!" Miller screamed, lunging for me. He tackled me toward the front door just as the air in the room seemed to expand. The windows didn't just break, they disintegrated outward in a spray of diamond-sharp glass. I felt David's hand catch the back of my coat, his strength born of a terror I hoped never to see again. We tumbled off the porch and onto the damp grass just as the living room erupted. The sound wasn't a bang, it was a roar. A deep, earth-shaking whump that felt like the house was exhaling its final breath. A shockwave rolled over us, hot and smelling of ancient dust and fresh fuel. I looked back and saw the home where I had raised my son, the home where Martha had lived and died, engulfed in a pillar of fire that reached for the stars. In the driveway, Thorne's SUV didn't speed away. He stood by the open door, silhouetted by the inferno, his face twisted in a mask of cold disappointment. He wasn't afraid of the fire. He was angry that we were still breathing. He reached into his coat, and I knew he wasn't looking for a phone. "Thorne, drop it!" Miller yelled, scrambling to his feet and leveling his weapon over the hood of my silver Audi. Blue and red lights suddenly flooded the street. From both ends of Oakcrest Drive, silent cars with flashing racks roared toward us. The evacuation at the precinct hadn't been a trap for me. It had been the signal to move. Miller hadn't been alone. He'd been the tether, waiting for Thorne to commit to a location. Thorne looked at the approaching police, then at the burning house, and finally at me. He saw the end of his empire in the reflection of my eyes. He didn't fire. He dropped the gun and raised his hands, the calculated businessman, until the very last second. As the officers swarmed Thorne and his men, the fire department began to battle the blaze, but it was a lost cause. The gas main had turned the house into a blowtorch. I sat on the curb, my chest heaving, the heat of the fire warming my face while the night air chilled my back. David sat beside me, his head in his hands, sobbing with a sound that broke what little was left of my spirit. He was covered in soot, his expensive suit ruined, his legacy literally turning to ash behind him. "I'm sorry, Dad," he choked out between gasps. "I was so deep. I thought if I could just get the money, I could pay them off and you'd never have to know. I thought I was protecting the family." "By burning it down, David?" I asked, my voice a hollow rasp. "I didn't think you were inside," he whispered. "I thought you were at the precinct. I just wanted the ledger. I thought if I destroyed the evidence Thorne had against me—" "There was no ledger, David," I said softly. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and confused. "What? But you said Martha kept everything. You said—" "I said she kept the records of the family business," I interrupted. "But the business she cared about wasn't money. It was people." I reached into the inner pocket of my coat and pulled out a small leather-bound diary. It wasn't filled with bank account numbers or wire transfers. It was filled with names of students I had taught, neighbors Martha had helped, families who had fallen through the cracks of the city's bureaucracy. The ledger Thorne wanted was the evidence of his own money laundering, I explained, as the fire began to die down under the weight of the water. But I didn't hide that in the house. I gave that to the state attorney 3 months ago. That's why Miller was there. That's why Project Phoenix was being watched from the start. I wasn't the fall guy, David. I was the bait. David stared at the diary, then at the smoldering ruins of his childhood home. "Then why? Why sell the house? Why put yourself through this?" "Because Thorne owned the deed to the warehouse," I said. "And as long as he owned it, those kids would never be safe. I had to buy him out, David. I had to use the one thing he wanted, this house, to draw him into a transaction that could be traced by the feds. I sold the house to a shell company run by the FBI. Every cent I paid Thorne for that warehouse was marked. Every contract he signed was a confession." I stood up, my old bones aching. I looked at the sold sign, now melted and leaning at an angle. The secret philanthropic venture wasn't just a building or a school, it was a reckoning. I had used the physical house to preserve the moral house Martha had built. "The money from the sale is in a protected trust," I told David, who was looking at me like he'd never seen me before. "It's going to rebuild the East Side Center, and the rest is going to legal fees. For you." David's face crumpled. "Legal fees? Dad, You made your choices, David," I said, the hardness in my voice returning. "You conspired with a criminal. You endangered lives. You'll have to answer for that. But you're my son. I won't let you drown, but I won't lie for you either. You're going to tell Miller everything. You're going to help them dismantle Thorne's entire network. It's the only way you're ever going to be able to look at yourself in a mirror again." Miller approached us, his face grim. He looked at David, then at me. "We have Thorne in custody. He's already trying to cut a deal, but we have the wire transfers and the forensic digital trail from your home office. Your son needs to come with us, Arthur." I nodded. I leaned down and kissed David on the forehead, just as I had when he was a boy afraid of the dark. Do the right thing, David. For once, don't look at the cost. Just look at the truth. I watched as they led him away. He didn't fight. He walked with his head down, a man who had finally realized that the walls he thought were so important were nothing compared to the foundation they stood upon. 1 year later, I stood in front of a brand new building in the heart of the East Side. It wasn't a warehouse anymore. It was a bright, modern facility with the Martha Graham Center etched into the stone above the door. Inside, the smell of fresh cedar and floor wax reminded me of my old life, but the sounds were different. Instead of the quiet ticking of a grandfather clock, there was the laughter of teenagers, the hum of power tools in the workshop, and the rhythmic tapping of keyboards in the computer lab. My apartment on 5th Street was small, yes. It was a shoebox, as David had called it, but it was filled with light. On the wall hung the only thing I had saved from the fire, a small, scorched mahogany frame containing a picture of Martha and me on the day we bought the house on Oakcrest. The house was gone. The mahogany table was ash. The cedar closets were memories. But as I watched a young man, a boy who had once been a lookout for Thorne's men, proudly show me the circuit board he'd just soldered, I knew I hadn't lost a thing. I had sold a home to build a future. And for the first time in a long time, as I looked out at the city I had served my entire life, I felt like I was finally, truly home.